Alright, the topic for this week is responsive design using media queries in CSS. So we're really just going to cover the basics of responsive design, really just know enough to be dangerous. There's kind of other things that are much deeper than just using media queries to do a basic fluid or responsive experience on the client side. Later on, when we get a little bit deeper into CSS3 and SAS and other more advanced topics, we can really start talking about other things like graceful degradation, which is a concept talking about how to almost get the experience that you were looking for if the browser doesn't support whatever you were trying to code. So we're not going to get that deep this week, simply because I'm going to introduce our course semester-long project pretty soon here, and I wanted to kind of give you guys a break this week. So we're just going to do a quick coverage of media queries and responsive design. It's actually a pretty fun topic, and it's very easy. So this should be kind of a nice little break that we need. I'm going to start off just by giving you some examples of what some of this terminology means. So I don't know what this site is. I just randomly came across it on the internet. So, but I found it to be a really good example of something called, some people call this elastic design. All of this that I'm showing you falls into the category of responsive design. I guess I should define that for you. Responsive design means I don't know if the person who is looking at this website is going to be looking at it on a phone or on a tablet or on a huge screen. If they're on an iPhone, are they going to be in portrait mode or landscape mode? I have no idea what the size of the device is going to be. So, what do I do when I have a huge page like this and they open it up on a phone? There's no way, it's going to look good. So responsive design means I need to change the design depending on what type of, what we call form factor. The form factor means how big the screen is, basically. So with this page, it's a really good example of, okay, I'm on a computer now and it looks fine, but once I start to shrink it down, you'll notice that this kind of snaps into a new layout, smaller. Even Flo disappeared. We didn't have room for her anymore, and snaps one more time. Oh, one more time. There we go. Now it's down to the smallest. So this is the smallest form factor of this particular website, and you'll notice this looks like it actually might fit and look pretty good on an iPhone. So you can kind of choose how many form factors you want to support in a elastic design like this. I'm not really sure if everybody calls this elastic. Sometimes this is just called responsive, or the reason they call it elastic sometimes is because it snaps into these particular form factors. But while in a certain form factor, you don't see any change. So notice, once we've gotten to the largest form factor, as I'm resizing the screen, nothing's really changing. It's all the same. So kind of the opposite of this elastic design, and this is, I would strongly suggest using this design. I think it looks the best. It's kind of the most commonly used as opposed to a fluid design. So I'm going to show you an example of a fluid design now here. So you can look at this page, awards.com/websites. So this gives like a list of really nice responsive web pages that you can maybe emulate a little bit, but don't get too far into it. But this one right here is a pretty good example of fluid design. As you'll notice, as I make the page smaller, everything is shrinking and getting bigger in real time. See, you can see every tiny little pixel change. That image right there is getting bigger and smaller. So that's one example of fluid. Fluid means it's not snapping at these intervals. It's just constantly changing as you change it. I don't particularly recommend that. I think it's probably, I don't know, maybe it's a little easier to do, but I find that it can be problematic. I like having a set of form factors that you expect, because then it's just a little more stable, I think, perhaps. It's kind of hard to comment on it because everybody has their own opinion on which one is better. It's a little subjective. Anyway, so that's basically, I just wanted to show you basically the difference between kind of, the elastic design that we're going to implement here. And actually I implemented a little bit of both. And kind of the fluid design of where everything's changing while you're moving it. So we'll close that. So now onto the code. So here's just a little bit of code that I prepared for you to show you how to do this. It's really simple. So as usual, the only other file I have here is my style sheet. So there's my link to my styles. As usual, I've wrapped everything in my body in a single div. So I treat it like a singular node of content, so that this makes it much easier to address in CSS. So if I have, another, just to reiterate, if I have another page somewhere else with the rows and text labels and stuff, then we won't have a name collision. So here's my main content, and inside of there I have 2 rows. Okay, and these 3 divs are really the only thing you need to care about in this example. So these 2 divs are text labels, and this input is a text input. So this input and these 2 divs are all you need to care about. So if we go back and look at our styles, well, actually I'm not going to come back to here, so just take note that we have 2 rows. The top row has text labels and the bottom row has an input. So if you look at our styles, so instead of looking at the media queries, just focus right here for a second. Actually, let's go all the way down to the bottom. Focus right here for a second. So I've said find the text label class inside of main content and give it display inline block, and find the text input inside of main content and give it a width of 500 pixels. So what I get over here is inspect there. So now I can look exactly at what I was looking at before, and just like my CSS says, if I examine the top 2 divs here, text label, I can see over here that they're marked as inline block, just as it said in my class. And then my second row, I have my text input. So the reason I put these in 2 different divs called rows is so that the text label would stack underneath the top div. So it's kind of like this row on top of that row. 2 labels are in the same row. So it gets interesting when we go back and look at the thing that we were ignoring, which is one of these. So when you wrap this style here, these 2 styles that we just talked about, in this type of syntax here in CSS, this is what's called a media query. So by saying at media screen and then this condition, well, when we examine the condition, we say the minimum width is 1025 pixels. So what that means is if my browser gets any bigger than 1025 pixels in width, all of a sudden these styles start becoming active. And if this is not true, it's kind of like an if statement. And if this statement is not true, then those styles below are not going to happen, or they're going to become inactive. In other words, as soon as I go below 1025 width, and I fall into this category here right above, which is a different media query that says if you're above 768 but below 1024, or at or below 1024, then all of a sudden these styles are going to go away and these styles are going to come in. So this is basically, it reads just like an if statement. It's kind of like a big if then else statement. So it started up here at the top and we say, okay, look, if you're anything up to 320 is the max. So this is basically your iPhone portrait media query. Anything up to 320 but no bigger than 320, we're going to use these styles. And then it's like else, if you're between 320 and 480, then use these styles. Else, if you're between 480 and 768, use these styles, and so on and so forth. And then this is anything above 1025. So what I've done here is I've created myself basically five form factors. I said if you're this big, use those styles. If you're this big, use those styles. Now this logically makes sense because none of these conditions are ever going to collide, because I've made the numbers so that they don't overlap. But you can, just like in an if statement in code, you have total freedom to write this any way you want. So, your logic doesn't need to make sense. As long as it makes sense for you and what you're trying to do, you don't have to implicate the same exact styles in every media query. You kind of, can mix it up and match it as long as it accomplishes your goal. The only functionality the media query really gives you, the main functionality, is, a condition as to whether or not you want to have those styles exist within that particular form factor. So, you'll see here, you can literally see the DOM changing. Here, well, let me highlight my text label. So let's look in here for a second. So at the highest form factor, at every one of these, I can see the text input getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. So if you just look at the text input here, we can see its width is 500. As I start getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, I've just crossed into the new media query. You can see it there. The max width 1024 and the min width 768. I didn't do anything here, but all of a sudden the DOM just changed and the width is now 400. So we can see it as we kind of just drag right across that threshold there. You can see the DOM changing from 400 to 500 back and forth as we cross that threshold. And you know, Google Chrome makes it nice by showing us the dimensions up there as we're changing. So that's nice. What becomes, well, you know, that's fine. That's doing width, right? That's all well and good. But you know, that doesn't seem very interesting. What gets interesting is how to use this technique to start significantly changing what you see, and that comes into play right here. So this display inline block, it's turning into a display block the moment that I cross over from 480 pixels. This is basically my iPhone portrait form factor, and this is basically my iPhone landscape form factor, and this is kind of like the something bigger than a phone but smaller than an iPad. So this is kind of like my phablet type of, or you know, Kindle Fire type of form factor. So this is interesting here. I say as soon as I know I'm a phone, then I'm doing something serious here. I'm like changing the layout. I don't want it to be inline block anymore. I want it to be block now. So as soon as I transfer over to that phone layout, which is the next one, watch what happens to my two labels here. I'm gonna highlight one of them. So all of a sudden now they're piled up on top of each other instead of back and forth. Instead of inline block, they're now display block. And you can see right here the style changing as you cross the threshold. If I highlight the right thing, inline block, block, inline block, block. So that's showing you how you can, by changing the layout aspects of the CSS, not just the layout, but also, you know, doing things like hidden, right? Being able to show things or hide things, you can literally change everything, the nature of everything that's on the screen based on how small it is. So instead of having, you know, we have the same exact things on the screen, but instead of them sprawling left to right because you have all this space, you get down into the phone mode and all of a sudden they're piled up on top of each other because you don't have any room anymore going horizontally. So, you know, we saw that technique on that one very white and blue website where everything was, you know, kind of getting smashed down and going down to the next line. It looked like they were replacing the entire page with, you know, new controls. Oh, get rid of these big controls and use these smaller ones. They weren't really. Not at all. All they were doing was doing a media query on the style, changing the layout a little bit, having some things stack vertically instead of horizontally, changing some widths, maybe a little bit of, you know, hide and show, you know, like on the flow image. They did a hide or a display none, right? So these are the types of things that are actually really easy to do with simple media queries. And that's kind of it. I mean, there's really not a whole lot of complexity behind media queries. The only other thing that I put in this example that I wanted to show you was one aspect of fluid design. So up here you'll notice that I made the main content, I gave it a border of 1 pixel solid black, kind of surrounds everything. And that one I just said the width is 80%. So no matter what, this one is not inside of a media query, it's just 80% width. So no matter what I do, the outside, you can see right, kind of right, I'm not sure if I'm highlighting it, but you can see right, oh, there we go. You can see the blue section of this always has this 1 pix solid black border around it that's always going to be 80% of the screen, no matter what. So using those percent styles, that's more of a fluid design, and I don't even really consider that too, well, I mean, it's technically responsive, but it's definitely, the media query elastic design is a lot more, you know, in your face responsive, because it's not just saying, oh, you're this proportion of the screen. It's, you know, literally giving you the ability to, you know, relay out your page depending on the form factor. So you can really dramatically change the way your page looks. And again, I refer you to the, you know, kind of the look that I showed you at the beginning of the video, where it really looked like you were going from something that looks like a website to something that was designed for a phone. And, you know, to kind of end on that note, I just want to say, when you get to the smallest form factors, like the max width of 320, you want to make it look like a native app. You want to make it look like you're not on a website. That's the whole purpose of mobile web. We don't call it mobile web because it's looking at a website on a phone. We call it mobile web because we want it to look mobile. And what that means is we want to make it look like it's an app. So, again, going back to this random site on the internet, when you scrunch it all the way back down to the bottom, if I showed you a screenshot of this from, right here to this button down here, you might not be able to tell that it's not an app that you downloaded in the App Store. There's a few things that give it away for sure, but the point is, you're going for that look and feel. You can see the kind of status bar up here. This is not just this site, obviously. This is every mobile website on the internet, I think, is trying to go for looking as native as possible. That's kind of the goal. So what I would encourage you to do is, at least have a couple of media queries at the very least. I mean, some sites have just like two, like what desktop version and phone version. That's fine. You don't have to do 5, but at least have something where it's like, whoa, look at all this stuff all over the screen, and it's just like, no way can you put that on a phone. But then just throw a media query in there to make it look great on a phone. I mean, if you have at least those two, you have a single website. I mean, think of the power of this. Instead of hiring a team of developers for your company to write some native application you have to go to the App Store and download a new program for, they just open up a browser and they can see the same exact website. Just with a couple of media queries, you can change the styles to dramatically change the appearance on your phone. So it's really powerful for being so ridiculously easy. Yes, of course, there are more advanced responsive design techniques that perhaps we'll get into. But I guess my philosophy is it's really not that hard to begin with. Shouldn't make it any harder than it is. So I'm not going to back down from this just because it's easy. I'm not going to try to overcomplexify it. So I think I'm just going to leave it at that. What I really want you guys to be able to get out of this is, one, just obviously understanding the syntax of media queries and being able to do this. And two, just the knowledge that you probably want to give a thought to having a mobile version of your website, and you can get away with that by just kind of being really mindful of your different form factors, and how can I take all this content and keep the same exact elements on the screen, perhaps in most of them, but shrink it down and make it look good on a phone. So there's that. The one last thing I wanted to show you was, there's a million ways to do media queries. I'm not going to go through all of them because they're uber boring, but if you want, you can. I just got this by Googling media queries. And here we have, a page that says media queries for standard devices. I don't really believe that there's ever such a thing as standard devices. It's changing like freaking crazy all the time. But this at least can get you almost at where you want to be. So, you can go through these and be like, oh, this one's going to kind of support smartphones, iPad, portrait and landscape, desktops and laptops. These are all, I feel like most of them are pretty decent. But in the end, you get to decide, what media queries you want to write in order to support the devices you want. And you have to test them on different devices. Don't just trust the media queries. Actually, crack open the device that you're concerned with, open up your website and see if it looks any good on that particular device. That's what we call device testing. You got to do it. Just like you have to do browser testing. If you're doing it, just a desktop website and you don't care about mobile, everybody tests their applications in various browsers. Well, now, we have mobile web. We have this. And now, guess what? You got to do more than test it on various browsers. You got to test it on various devices too. So, take a look at it on an Android, take a look at it on a few Androids, take a look at it on a big iPhone, a small iPhone, an iPad. Just kind of go nuts, test it, make sure it looks good everywhere. This is kind of the world you live, or sorry, I shouldn't say you. This is the world we live in now. multiple browsers, multiple devices, and it's scary, but at the same time, it gives you an opportunity to really kind of be creative and present a really nice, rich experience for your website on multiple different platforms. So, this should be a kind of hopefully not too technical, kind of more of a creative and fun assignment than the previous ones, and hopefully give you a little more downtime to rest up for the project that's going to start soon. All right.